There is a thing I've kept about the Yukon that I don't say out loud in town, not because I'm afraid of the laughing. I'm too old now for the laughing to reach me. I keep it because saying it makes it more real. And there's a certain kind of real I've been trying for a long time to walk back from. My name is Halvor. I trapped out of a cabin north and east of Eagle from the fall of 1932 until the spring of 1951. Marten, lynx, some fox, a little wolverine, when the wolverine was foolish, which is almost never. 19 winters. I ran a line up along a creek the old Han called by a name I never learned to say right, and the whites on the map called Cabin Creek. Because there was once a cabin, and then there wasn't. I'm going to tell you what I know about that country, not what I heard, what I know. And before I begin, if you're listening now, do me a small favor. Tell me in the comments where you're hearing this from. What town, what time of night? I like knowing that. It helps. Now, a note before this one begins. If the kind of case I tell here is one you'd want more of, not one, but 10, each told in full in a voice made for the dark, there's a collection. What the Mountain keeps 10 files from 10 counties, 5 states, 1893 to 1955. Every one of them walked up into easy-looking ground, and everyone signed off by the law with the wrong word. 10 hours to sit within the dark, start to finish. The link is in the description and pinned at the top of the comments. Now then, I came up to the country in the fall of 1932, 31 years old. I had a used Winchester, an axe head my father had wrapped in oiled paper the year he died, and the address of a man in Eagle who had written me one letter, and then never written another. The man's name was Rurik Skogard. He was a Dane by birth and an Alaskan by attrition, which is what he called it. And by 1932, he'd been in the country 22 years. He had a face like a boot that had been through a river. He had 6 fingers on his right hand and 8 on his left, which is to say he'd lost enough of them that the count no longer worked. He carried a knife on his belt that was older than either of us. The bone handle was worn smooth and yellow like the inside of a tooth. He met me at the boat with a nod and no words, and we didn't speak for the 90 miles up to his cabin. When we got there, he made coffee, sat me down, and said the first real thing he'd said to me. He said, "You'll want to learn the sound of the country before you learn anything else. That's the whole job. Everything after is trapping." I nodded like a man who understands. I did not understand. I lived that first winter with Rurik and learned the country under him. He was strict, not cruel. He'd say a thing once. If I did it wrong twice, he'd stop bringing me on that particular run of the line, and I'd have to find my own way back to what he'd shown me that was worse than a beating and cheaper. By the second winter, I had my own place 12 miles up from his one-room tar paper over log, a barrel stove that had come up the river from Dawson in 1911 and still ran. A bunk in the corner, a window I kept clean because a dirty window in that country will make a man lose his mind faster than the cold will. I'm going to skip past the years where nothing happened because most of the years were years where nothing happened. That is the first thing you should know about the Yukon if you're ever in it. Most of the time nothing happens. The country is patient in a way that at first seems like emptiness, and then if you stay starts to seem like attention. I want to tell you about the winter of 1940. That is where this begins for me. It was a mild fall that year, which was the first wrong thing, though nobody yet knew to name it wrong. The snow held off into the second week of October. The creek was still running clear on the 11th. I remember that because it was my birthday, and I stood on a stone above the water and watched an usual dip and rise and dip again. And I thought to myself, this is a country that will let me get old. That was the last easy thought I had about it. 3 days later, I was out on the middle run of the line about a mile past the fork of what I called Second Creek. A cold blue morning, wind still, sun on the ridges, and shadow in the trees. I came to a marten set I had baited 2 days earlier and found it sprung. The trap thrown clear. No, marten, that happens. What did not happen, what I had never seen happen in all my time in that country, was what was in the snow around it. Tracks. Not the martens, not a wolverine, which will rob a set if given the chance and time. Not a wolf, not a lynx, not a man. The tracks came down out of the trees on the north side of the little clearing, walked once around the sprung trap, sat on their heels, if that is even the word for what they did, and then walked back into the trees the same way they had come. 2 feet, longer than mine by half, barefoot, in October at about 10 below. I stood there a long time, and I did not touch the tracks, and I did not follow them. I want to be honest with you. My first thought was a man has lost his mind out here. That happens. Every few years someone comes up to the country too proud or too broke, and they go long in the woods, and the country takes their reason from them one piece at a time. I had seen a man in Circle City in the summer of 1936 who could no longer answer to his own name, and it had made me cold in the way the winter did not, because I could not tell what part of him had gone and what part was left. That was my first thought. My second thought, which came a few minutes later, was that the tracks were too deep for a barefoot man. They were deep the way a shod man's tracks are deep when he's carrying something. I went back to Rurik's cabin that night instead of my own. I told him what I had seen. He was standing at his stove with his back to me, and he did not turn around when I told him. He stirred whatever was in his pot. He said, "Where?" I told him. He said, "How many?" I told him 1 set. He said, "How deep?" I showed him with my hand. He nodded once, still not looking at me. And he said, "You won't run that part of the line for a while. Move your sets down to the fork. Give it 3 weeks. If you see it again, come here that day. Don't sleep at your own place. Don't go alone." I said, "Rurik, what is it?" He said, "It's better if you don't have a name for it. A name makes it come when you say it. Trust me on this. Move your sets." I moved my sets. I did not see the tracks again that October. I did not see them in November either, and by the time the first real cold came in early December, I had almost convinced myself it had been a man after all, some starving fool up from the river, half out of his head, who had wandered off south and died in a drift somewhere, and would not be found until breakup. That is what I told myself. I want you to notice how easy it is when a strange thing does not repeat to make it small in your mind, to fold it up and put it in a drawer. I did that for 2 months. Then on the 16th of December, in the black hour before dawn, I heard a voice outside my cabin. It said my name. It said Halvor. It said it once clearly in Rurik's voice. I sat up in my bunk. I did not answer. I sat there in the dark with the stove ticking, and I listened. The voice did not say my name again, but it walked. I heard it walk once around the cabin. A slow, even step, not the crunch of a boot in December snow. A softer step, a wrong step. I could hear the snow give, and I could not hear anything land on it. It walked once around, and then it went away. In the morning, I went out with a lantern before the light came, and I found no tracks. Not one, not around the cabin, not near the wood pile, not on the trail. Fresh snow had fallen in the night, maybe an inch, and there were no tracks in it, not mine from the day before. Nothing. That is when I understood there was a rule I did not know about that country. There had been a rule this whole time, and I had lived 9 years there without ever bumping against it. And now I had bumped against it, and I did not know what the rule was, only that I had broken it, only that it had noticed me. I went to Rurik that afternoon. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he sat a long time in his chair, and he did not look at me. He looked at the stove. Then he said, "Havor, Erland Thorson didn't come in for coffee last week." I felt the cold in the small of my back before I felt it anywhere else. Aaron Thorson was a Norwegian who ran a trap line about 18 miles south and west of us. He was maybe 60 then, and he had been in the country since before the First War. He was a hard man, which is the highest compliment I can pay a person, and he was fond of Rurik in the way that hard men are fond, which is to say, he never once said so. Every second Wednesday in the winter, Erland came up the river valley to Rurik's cabin. He came for coffee. He never stayed long. He would sit for an hour, exchange news, drink his coffee, and go. Rurik had told me about this the first winter I was there. It had been going on for 12 years. Erland had not missed a Wednesday in 12 years. He had missed the last 2. Rurik said, "Tomorrow you and I are going to walk over to Erland's." I said, "Now?" He said, "Tomorrow in the light." We went the next day. I want to say plainly that what we found at Erland's cabin I'm not going to describe. I owe Erland that. I owe his sisters in Bergen that, though they have all been dead for many years. What I will say is that the cabin was standing. The door was closed. The stove was cold and had been cold for a long time. Erland's boots were by the stove. His coat was on its hook. His rifle was in the corner. His pipe was on the little table by the bunk. He had a bag of coffee that was open and a cup and a spoon set out on the shelf, as if he were about to make coffee and had been called away. There was no sign of a struggle inside. I want you to hear that clearly. No sign of a struggle inside. Outside was different. We did not go far outside. We did not need to. Rurik saw what he needed to see about 30 yards past the wood pile, and he put his hand on my chest, and he said, "That's far enough. You've seen it. We go back. We walked back to his cabin in silence that afternoon. We did not run. We walked slow and steady, and we did not talk. When we got in, Rurik took a piece of paper and he wrote a note in his shaky, careful hand. And he said we would take that note down to Eagle on the next mail, and we would say Erland had gone missing, and that we had found his cabin empty, and that a man of his age should be looked for. We would not say what we had seen outside. Rurik said, "You understand why?" I said no. He said because there is no help for it in Eagle. There is no help for it in Fairbanks. There is no help for it in Washington. The help is here, and it is knowing when to walk and when not to walk and what to say to it, and what never to say. I said, "Rurik, what is it?" He looked at me a long time. He said, "When I came up to this country in 1910, there was an old man on the river named Innocenti. He was a Creole Russian father, Han mother. He was maybe 80 years old, and he had seen everything a man could see in this country, and a few things a man is not supposed to see. He told me when I was younger than you are now that there was a thing in these hills that did not have a name in any language he spoke. He said the old Han name for it was a name of a thing, not the thing itself. He said the Russian priests had a name for it that was borrowed from another country. He said the whites hadn't been here long enough to name it and shouldn't. He said if I ever found sign of it, I was to walk small until it passed. He said it did not hunt every year. It did not hunt every trapper. He said the ones it hunted were the ones who had drawn its eye somehow. And he could not tell me how a man drew its eye. He said sometimes a man simply walked into that country and it looked up. He said it was old. He said it had been here before people. He said the people who had come to this country first had made an arrangement with it, and the arrangement had held for a long time. He said the arrangement was not held by us. Rurik stopped. He drank some of his coffee. He said, "Halvor, it has looked up. Now, I want to pause here for a moment before I tell you the rest. Because there's a lot of rest to tell. Some of you listening have felt something similar. Not this, not exactly this, but something. A night when the house was too quiet. A road where you knew without knowing to turn around. If you've had a moment like that, tell me in the comments. Just a few words. I read them. I want to know I'm not the only old man who has felt this thing. And if you're finding value in what I'm telling you here, this is the Makaira Story channel. If it means anything to you, subscribe. If you're hearing this on some other channel, somebody has taken it without asking. Report it to us. We'll do the rest. Now, where was I? Rick and I sent that note down to Eagle on the January mail. The territorial troopers came up in February on a bright cold week, and they looked at Erland's cabin, and they went about 30 yards past the wood pile the same way we had, and they came back the way we had, and none of them spoke on the walk. The report they filed in Fairbanks called it a bear in February at 40 below. I read the report myself years later in a public building down in Juneau. I read it, and I laughed one time hard in the quiet room, and the librarian looked up at me. A bear. Because a bear was a word you could put in a file and close the file. The winters of 1941 and 42 were quiet. I mean quiet the way I have been telling you. I ran my line. I moved a few of my sets further in toward Rurik's ground. I stopped running the north branch of Second Creek altogether. I told myself it was because the marten had thinned there, which was true. And I did not tell myself the other reason, which was also true. There was a war on down in the world by then. Of course, I did not know most of what was happening in it. I had a battery radio and a shortwave that worked sometimes and did not work most of the time. I heard about the illusions when the illusions were happening, and I heard about them again a year later when they were over. That was the war in my country. I mention it only because it was a way of measuring time. The winter of the illusions was the winter I first heard the voices at a distance. I need to talk about the voices because this is the part that I understand least. Sometime after Erland Thorson was taken, the country I had lived in for 9 years began to speak in voices. They were always voices I knew, never strangers, never a woman I did not know. The first one I heard other than the one on the night in December was a voice that belonged to a man named Pete Lux who had died on the ice below Circle in 1937. Pete had been fond of a certain song of nonsense song, an old sailor's song about a green bottle. I had heard him sing it maybe 50 times in the years I knew him. When Pete was drunk enough, he would sing that song. And when he was drunk or still, he would forget most of the words and only sing the chorus. In the winter of 1942, walking along my own trap line on a still afternoon, I heard the chorus of that song coming from somewhere behind me and to my left in the trees at about 100 yards. Pete's voice, Pete's cadence, the wrong words in the right places, the way Pete sang it when he was too far gone to remember. I stopped. I did not turn. I said out loud, "Pete's dead." The singing stopped. I stood there. For maybe a minute. Then I walked on. I did not look behind me. I did not run. I walked. When I got back to my cabin that night, I sat by the stove and I thought about it for a long time, and I understood something. I understood that whatever was out there, it did not know that Pete was dead, or it did know and it did not care. Or, and this is the thought that has stayed with me for 35 years, it had gotten Pete's voice from somewhere, and it was using the voice. And where it had gotten the voice was a question I did not want to hold in my mind for very long. I told Rurik about the singing. He said, "It's learning you." I said, "What do you mean learning me?" He said, "It's finding out what you'll answer to, what you'll turn toward. It calls in your friends first, because your friends are the easy call. If you don't turn for your friends, it goes deeper. It goes to voices you loved. It goes to voices you have not heard in years." I said, "How do you know this?" He said, "Because I have lived here 32 years, and I have listened and I have talked with 2 other old men, both of them dead now, who lived here longer than I did, and this is what I know." He said, "Haver, don't answer them. Whatever they call, whatever they say, don't answer them. Don't say the name back. Don't say hello. Don't say what. Don't say who is that. Especially don't say who is that. That is the worst answer. That's an invitation." I said, "Rurik, have you answered?" He looked at his stove. He said, "Once, a long time ago, and I have been careful ever since." He did not tell me who had called him. I did not ask. That was the winter I began to sleep with the stove door propped open a little, so the fire would throw its light around the cabin all night. I told myself it was for the warmth. I want to tell you about the winter of 1943 now, because that was the winter I saw it. Not clearly, never clearly, but I saw enough that I know I saw it. There was a stretch of the trap line that ran along a low ridge above the creek, maybe a mile and a half of ridge. On the north side of that ridge, the country dropped away into a long, thin valley full of dead spruce, killed by some old fire. The year before I was born, the dead spruce stood in the valley like a crowd of tall gray men, and the wind moved through them in the way wind moves through a thing that used to be alive. I did not like that valley. I never set traps in it, but I had to walk the ridge above it because that was the only way through to a run of good marten country beyond. One afternoon in late January, walking that ridge, I looked down into the valley of the dead spruce because I had made the mistake of glancing that way, and I saw something standing among the trees. It was tall. I don't want to tell you how tall because I don't want to make it a story. I want to tell you what I saw. It was taller than the trees around it, and those trees were maybe 14 feet high where they still had their tops and lower where they didn't. It was thin. It stood the way a man stands when a man is standing still. But it was not a man. It did not move. I did not move. I want to be clear about something. In the 2 or 3 seconds I looked at it, I did not see a face. I do not know if it had one. I saw a shape that read as tall and thin and upright in gray. And I saw the country around it. And something in me refused to process the middle of it. The way your eye refuses a bright light and looks away. I looked away. I kept walking. I did not run. I want to say again that I did not run. I understood at some level below thought that running was the wrong answer. Running was the thing it was waiting for. So I did not run, and I walked the rest of that ridge at the same pace I had been walking. And I did not look back into the valley. And when I got to the end of the ridge, I walked down the far side and around the base of it, and back to my cabin by the long way, adding maybe 4 miles to my walk because I would not go back along the ridge. And here is the part one remember most. The whole time I was walking, I heard nothing behind me. Not a bird, not a step, not the wind. The country had gone silent again the way it went silent when it was paying attention, and it stayed silent for 2 hours until I put my hand on the latch of my cabin door. The moment my hand touched the latch, the wind came back. A bird called on the ridge behind me. A tree cracked in the cold. The country switched on again, the way a room switches on when the person who was watching from the corner walks out. I went inside. I barred the door. I did not go out again that night. I stayed at Rurik's for the next 4 days. I told him what I had seen. He did not seem surprised. He said, "Now you know why I said don't have a name for it." He said, "You'll want to give it one. You'll want to give it one because a name makes it small. You put a thing in a name the way you put a fox in a snare, and once it's in the name, you feel like it's yours. But you'll be wrong. You'll only have made it interested in you again. It doesn't like to be named. So don't name it. Don't say what you saw. Not to anyone. Not even to yourself. Especially not to yourself. When you think about it, and you will think of it as the country, say to yourself the country. Say the country did that. The country was up there. Because that is what it is. It is not something in the country. It is the country. It's an old part of the country that is still awake, when the rest of it is asleep. I have followed that rule for 35 years. I have thought of it as the country. I want you to notice that in all this telling, I have not given it a name. That is on purpose. And I would ask you if you are inclined, when you comment below on where you are hearing this from, to please not name it in the comments either. Do not name it in the guesses. If you want to guess in your own head, guess. But do not write the name. I know how that sounds. I am old enough not to care how it sounds. A breath here before what comes next. If this is the kind of case you'd want to sit with in the dark, not just hear it once, but keep it. There's a collection I put together with the people at Forbidden Unresolved Stories. What the Mountain Keeps. 10 complete cases, 8 hours, 62 years of records nobody wanted to finish. Each one placed, dated, and signed off with a tidy word that never once fit what happened. The link's in the description below and at the top of the comments. Let's go back to it. Now, winter of 1946. I was 45 years old that winter. Rurik was in his 68th year, and slowing in ways he did not like to talk about. That was the winter it came to the cabin. It had come near before in the sense that I have already told you around the outside voices at a distance, the valley, the tracks that October and 40. But there is a difference between something being in your country and something being at your door. That winter it came to the door. It happened over a period of maybe 3 weeks from about the 10th of January to the 2nd of February. The first sign was that my dog stopped going out. I had a dog then. His name was Osmo. He was a big, quiet, sensible dog, half husky and half something with a long jaw and a solemn face. And he was maybe 6 years old that winter. Osmo was not afraid of much. He was not afraid of moose. He was not afraid of bear. He had run wolves off my woodpile once, and I had felt sorry for the wolves. On the 10th of January, Osmo would not go past the door. I opened the door for him in the morning, and he stood in the doorway, and he looked out at the yard, and he did not go out. He looked at me. He looked back out. He did not growl. He did not whine. He simply refused to cross the threshold. I coaxed him. He did not come. I went out myself, and I looked around, and I saw nothing. The yard was as it had been. The woodpile, the outhouse, the little shed, the trail down to the creek, all in order. I called him. He would not come. He walked back into the cabin and lay down under my bunk, and he stayed there for 11 days. He would come out to eat. He would come out to relieve himself, which he did in a corner of the cabin on a piece of hide I put down for him, and I did not scold him for it. He would come out for me if I sat by the stove and called him softly. But he would not go out the door, and he would not sleep anywhere but under my bunk. And for 11 days I lived in a cabin with a dog who would not leave it. I understood, of course, I was running the line during those days. I had to. A man does not stop running his line in January. So I would go out in the mornings, and I would come back in the afternoons, and I would find Osmo in the same spot under my bunk watching the door. On the 17th of January, I came home in the last of the light, and I found something on the roof. I saw it as I came up the trail. It was a shape, a dark shape on the ridge of my cabin roof, longer than a man, thinner than a man, lying flat along the ridge, one arm hanging down the side of the pitch. I stopped at the edge of the yard, maybe 40 feet from the cabin, and I looked at it. It did not move. I looked at it for a long time, long enough that the light went further down, and the shape became less clear against the dark of the roof. I understood 2 things. The first was that if I went inside, it would still be on the roof, and I would be under it in a room with 1 door and 1 window, and I did not want to be under it. The second was that if I did not go inside, I would freeze in the yard because it was already 30 below and dropping. I made a choice. I walked toward the cabin, slow, steady, the way I had walked along that ridge in 43. I did not look up at the roof again as I came close. I opened the door and I went inside, and I closed the door and I barred it, and I did not look up at the ceiling either. Osmo was standing in the middle of the room. He was looking at the ceiling. He was not growling. He was not making any sound. He was standing perfectly still with his eyes on a spot above me and slightly to my left. And every hair on his back was up. I sat down by the stove. I did not look up. I put more wood in the stove. I made coffee. I did not eat. I sat and I drank my coffee, and I did not look up. There was a sound then that I have not told anyone about in 30 years. The sound was not on the roof. The sound was in the roof. The sound was in the wood of the roof, in the sod of the roof, as if something inside the roof was slowly settling into a more comfortable position. The sound went on for maybe 5 minutes. Then it stopped. Osmo was still watching the ceiling. He would watch the ceiling for another 2 hours. At some point in the night, I don't know when, I fell asleep in the chair by the stove. When I woke, it was gray outside, and Osmo was asleep at my feet, and I understood without checking that the roof was empty. I went out at first light. There were no tracks in the snow around the cabin. There were no tracks on the roof. There was a dent in the ridge line on the north side, where something heavy had lain long enough to press the sod down. The dent was maybe 7 feet long. I want to tell you what I did next, because I have thought about it every year for 35 years, and I still do not know if it was the right thing to do. I did not run. I did not pack up my cabin and go down to Eagle. I did not go to Rurik for 2 weeks, though he was 12 miles away, and I could have. I stayed. I stayed because I understood or thought I understood that running was still the wrong answer. That going down to Eagle was a kind of running, that leaving the country would be a signal, and I did not know what the signal would say, and I did not want to send it. So I stayed and I ran my line, and I kept my door barred at night, and I did not look up at my own roof for a week. On the 2nd of February, I woke up in the dark and I heard breathing. It was in my cabin. I don't mean my breathing, and I don't mean the dogs, and I don't mean the sound of the fire in the stove. I mean breathing, slow, even deep breathing, from somewhere in the room at about the height of a man's chest if a man were standing. I did not open my eyes. I want you to hear that. I did not open my eyes for maybe half an hour. I did not open my eyes. The breathing went on. It did not come closer. It did not move. It simply existed in the cabin with me and with my dog, and my dog made no sound, and the fire in the stove ticked, and somewhere far off, a great horned owl called once and did not call again. After a long time, I heard the breathing move. It moved from where it had been to a place nearer the door. It stood there a while, then it was not there. I opened my eyes some minutes later. The cabin was empty. The door was still barred from the inside. Osmo was under the bunk staring at the door. That morning I harnessed Osmo, and I broke camp for the winter, and I went down to Rurik's cabin, and I stayed there for the rest of the season. Rurik was not surprised to see me. He said, "It's been at your place." I said yes. He said, "It came inside." I said yes. He said, "You didn't open your eyes." I said no. He said, "That's why you're here." He said, "The ones who open their eyes are not here anymore." We did not speak of it again that winter. We ran his line together, and we did our work, and we slept in shifts, though we did not admit that we were sleeping in shift. And in April, I went down to my cabin, and I gathered my things, and I brought them back to his cabin, and I did not sleep at my own place for the last 4 years. I was in the country. Rurik died in the fall of 1950, not from anything strange. He died of a thing in his chest that had been growing for a long time, and he had known about it, and had not told me. And I found him one morning sitting in his chair by the stove with his coffee cold at his elbow and the paper in his lap, open to a page about a shipping report from Seattle. He was 72. I sat with him for a long time that morning. I built up the fire. I did not cry until later. I ran his line one more winter, and then in the spring of 1951 I packed up his cabin and mine, and I went down to Eagle, and I went down to Fairbanks, and I went down to Anchorage, and I have never been north of Anchorage again. Not once. I want to tell you the last thing because I know some of you are asking, and it's a fair question. Am I sure? Am I sure it was not the country doing what the country does to men who are alone in it too long? Am I sure it was not my own mind or a bear or a stranger or a story I told myself? I have thought about this. I have thought about it every day for 35 years. And I want to give you the honest answer, which is I am sure and I am not sure. I am sure in the way that a man is sure of a thing he has seen with his own eyes and heard with his own ears and lived with in his own cabin. I am not sure in the way that a man is never sure of a thing he cannot explain and cannot show to another person and cannot put in a jar. Both are true. I have not tried to go back. I did not go back for Erland's grave because Erland does not have a grave. I did not go back for Rurik's grave, though he does have one, and I know where it is, and I put the stone on it myself before I left. But I did not go back. Once in 1967, a young man from a university in Washington wrote to me. He had heard from someone in Eagle that I had trapped up in that country, and that there had been a disappearance in 1940, and he wanted to come and talk to me about it. He wanted to write a paper. I wrote him back. I told him I did not remember any disappearance in 1940. I told him he was thinking of some other man. That was the only lie I have told in 35 years about any of this. I told it to keep him out of that country. I hope he did not go. I do not know if he went. Sometimes in the last few years when I am asleep in my little house in Anchorage, I hear breathing in the room, slow, even deep at about the height of a man's chest. And I do not open my eyes. I lie there. I wait. And after a while, I hear it move to the door. And then I do not hear it. And in the morning, everything is where I left it. I do not know if it has followed me down, or if I am simply an old man now. And my memory is a room it walks through when it feels like walking. Both are possible. Both are, I think, the same thing in the end. I have told this story once. Now I have told it. If you have listened this far, I thank you. I would ask you to tell me one thing in the comments if you are willing. Not what you think it was, not a name. Just this, whether you have ever in your own life, in your own house, on your own road, in a country of your own, heard breathing you could not account for, and lain still, and waited it out, and known in the morning that you had done the right thing. If you have, I would like to know. It would help an old man sleep. If you knew someone who trapped in that country between the wars or in the years after, and they told you a thing that did not sound like a thing a sane man would say, please share it with us. Perhaps we'll bring it to another night, another telling. Stay with us for the next one. Until then,